Oh, come on, I thought I'd get at least as much energy as the stone soup reaction. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. All right, now we're already off to a terrible start because some of these pages are out of order. I blame Mark. Things are going to be okay. The difficulty about being in a world and in a life where you talk about facts and data and you're obsessed with accuracy means that when really awesome people and organizations ask you to come up and be creative or be vulnerable or be honest about yourself and take like a look at what's going on in here, that's pretty terrifying. But we're going to give it a go. So most days, as you just saw, this is how the world sees me. A lot of days, this is how I see myself. So which one is my actual reality? It's probably a little bit of both, but I would say that I'm also in the course of figuring that out, and it's been a long journey, and I think it's ongoing. So where did I start? Well, I'm a local girl. This is the Canby Junior Secondary class of '93. This was grade 10. That was an awesome year. See if you can find me. I was the kid who was bullied in school. And a lot of the folks in this shot would come up with great songs, and they would sing them in the hallways, and they would say things like, it was very sing-song. It was great. It was like things like, Shachi stink, Shachi farted. And I'm like, no, I think I cleared my bowels this morning. So I never felt particularly good about myself. I never felt particularly worthy. But there is something about spending those formative years with your elbows up and having to bluff and poker face your way out of getting beaten up in the parking lot, because some girls want to do that to you, and always being in a defensive posture. You do get tough. I'm not advocating that anyone should be really grateful for going through experiences like that. How many of you went through or go through experiences like that or have been through experiences like that? But it happens to a lot of us. About 3/4 of us actually report having experienced some bullying in their school years. But you figure out how to work it to your advantage. It teaches you a kind of fearlessness. And eventually that fearlessness can mean that you find yourself in situations and careers where you need a certain amount of toughness and fearlessness, such as journalism. So when you have to grill the premier of the day on the costs of the 2010 Olympics, and no one really wants to talk about that, I'm told that that is then Premier Campbell's thoughtful face. I think it's his grumpy face. But it takes a bit of fearlessness to go and do that. Or throwing on a hard hat and walking into a clear-cut area in the middle of protesters and industry on two sides of you and trying to do your thing. Or, this was terrifying, rappelling down a 13-story bank tower in a Supergirl outfit. It's a great shot of my rear end. For charity, believe it or not. You could not offer me anything in this world to do that again. But those times did teach me a lot about the lessons of life. Now today I work a slightly less loony job at a not-for-profit organization that I helped establish from scratch. I work in an office. These are my colleagues. They're awesome people. When I think about how I came to work with them, I think about this sunny late summer day almost 2 years ago, 2014, and I still picture myself sort of sitting in my jeans and my hoodie and my sneakers, and there's cardboard boxes everywhere because we did not have budget to rent frog boxes. So we went around to grocery stores and packing stores, and I think I might have, dumped all the photocopying paper out of some corporate offices, and that was how we moved. And I remember really grabbing my hair by the roots and wondering exactly what the heck had I done again? Because this was my third job change in 4 years. Now, we've come a long way as a team since then, and there are about 3 things that I've learned over the course of my working life that got me through it. And I'm going to share those 3 things, those 3 key takeaways with you this morning. So thank you again for being here to listen to that, and to Creative Mornings for having me here. But before I do that, and yes, I am being an ultimately fearless tease, because I'm not going to tell you just yet, I'm going to share with you a little bit of what I do now today as chief cook and bottle washer at the Angus Reid Institute. So in essence, I am a pollster. But what is that? I mean, you hear about polling, you hear about methodology, you hear about this is what people say and this is what they don't say, and you really never know who paid for the poll or why were the questions asked the way they were, or frequently, well, nobody ever asked me. Nobody asked me. Those numbers can't be right. Nobody asked me. In short, I have the luxury of really up close and personal getting to ask people about their lives, about their thoughts, about their feelings, their sentiments, their emotions, about their working lives, their personal lives, what they think of government, all sorts of interesting stuff. And then I get to tell you their answers, so that's a lot of fun. But how does polling work? Well, I could do a whole talk on that, but we're not going to do that. I am going to give you just a little quick history of how it evolved into doing what I do today. And so we start in the Leave It to Beaver era. Gallup was the firm that really pioneered polling as far back as the 1930s. But in the 50s and 60s, polling meant that somebody came to the door. Well, hello, ma'am. Might I come in? I'm from the Gallup Corporation. And because ma'am was home, because rates of women working outside the house post-war, we know everyone went back home and left the factories. They were home, and they said, why, sure, why don't you come sit a spell? And they would be asked all sorts of things, everything from coffee preferences to personal health issues to, again, the state of the country or their views on, what kind of job the mayor or the president was doing of the day. And that all happened with an interviewer looking someone squarely in the eye and seeking those answers. It was a face-to-face interview. Now, some of the good parts of doing this is when you are literally knocking on every door in neighborhoods where you can get people to answer the door, you get very accurate samples. The problem was they simply skipped a lot of neighborhoods. If you were in a black neighborhood, a Latino neighborhood, a low-income neighborhood, you weren't getting asked your opinion. So that was a little bit of a problem with non-existent sample. And over time, technology changed, and there were some recognitions of the issues with methodology. So we saw the dawn of a new era, the 1970s, the phone poll. And all of a sudden, you could take that face-to-face interviewer bias out of the equation. So all of a sudden, if someone's being asked if they have infidelity in the household or a sexually transmitted disease, people are perhaps a little bit less reticent to answer that question honestly when somebody is sitting 4 feet away from them over a cup of Sanka. Phone polling was its own new frontier at the time. The questions were hinging around, well, how do I know I'm talking to the person who says that they're talking to me? How do I know I'm talking to somebody who's 25? Might they be 45? What we found out over time was that respondents generally, when they want to answer your questions, are motivated to be honest. They don't really have anything to hide if they're interested in talking to you. Things really reached a peak when it came to phone polling. The 1980s. Costs came down, technology improved. The Miami Vice era of polling was one where pollsters were polling all the time. And everyone wanted to talk to pollsters. Everyone was interested in picking up the phone. But you knew that couldn't last forever. Things kind of went to crap with phone polling in the 1990s. Too many calls, the advent of call display, more people working outside the home, less irregular 9 to 5 hours, people getting called at dinner time. It was a problem. Then my boss, Angus Reid, and yes, he is a real person. I'm sure he's going to phone at any moment because he's looking for me. He pioneered the next era of polling, which is online polling. And again, I won't get into all of that right now. Suffice to say that we're sort of 10 years into a new methodology around it. I think it's really where polling is going to go for the next 15 to 20 until we figure out the next best thing. I don't know, maybe at that point we'll all just be empathically reading each other's minds, who knows. But that is what I do. I work on creating the questions and the themes and the topics that people get asked. They fill out polls online, and then I come back and I get to tell you folks what everyone is thinking. But in making that transition from bullied kid to pain in the ass reporter to pain in the ass pollster, you know, I did learn a few things. And so at this point I will stop teasing and I'll start telling. The first thing I learned is know your worth. So you can do everything correct and right and in the right order in life. You can go to school and study hard and get the right internships and work the right jobs. But at the end of the day, you really have to find yourself in here, at peace, and in a place where you feel that what you're doing is commensurate with your work. You have to be in the right place, and that place has to reflect your worth. So it's okay to want more, whatever that more is. It's okay to want more money. It's okay to want more recognition. It's okay to want to lead your team or be the big person on a project. And, you know, even as I say these words, I feel a little bit uncomfortable saying them out loud because I kind of think they make me sound like a bit of a jerk. But there is a reason for that. And the reason is that women are hardwired in such a way that worth and talking about money and talking about moolah and really whatever is the essence of what makes us, again, feel good about what we do, we're not comfortable at putting that at the top of our lists. And I know this because one of the perks of being a pollster is that I can ask Canadians almost anything. So I did a poll. And I talked to people in the knowledge and creative sector. I talked to folks who work in IT and in what we loosely call white collar work, but that really does cover new work, basically a lot of what you do in this room. What I found was some interesting gender differences. What you see is that more than half of men put their pay and benefits at the top of the list of what's important to them on the job. By contrast, fewer than 1/3 of women do. Think about that for a second. Because even though professional women say that pay and benefits aren't as important to them, they also report being far less satisfied with the dollar amount going into their bank accounts every 2 weeks. Men, 2/3 of them are happy. Women, fewer than half. So what do women say that they want? They're much more likely to say that personal fulfillment is more important to them than in terms of their overall job satisfaction. But guess what? They're not finding that either. 3/4 of professional men say that they are personally fulfilled at work, compared to just over half of women working in the same sectors. So while money may only be part of the equation, women, I would suggest, might want to think about giving a little bit more value and attaching a little bit more personal fulfillment to the number on our paychecks and our own worth. That's just a piece of it. And I also want to say that while I highlight some gender differences here with these poll results, regardless of how you identify or how one identifies in terms of their gender, whether it's part of that binary breakdown or not, or whether you think that I'm talking to just half of the room, it doesn't just apply to half of the room, because for those of you who may not feel that is a story that's being reflected in you, you are brothers, you are sisters, you are fathers, you're partners, and certainly there is a message to go and take back to your daughters, your sisters, your moms, the people that you're mentoring, the young people that you're talking to in life. So the second thing I learned, first thing was know your worth. Second thing I've learned along the way is to know when to say no and know when to say enough. And this is something strongly related to knowing your worth. About a decade into my time as a journalist, I'd worked my butt off, and I wanted to now work in a larger market. I wanted to keep growing my own career. And I got told two very distinct and interesting things. Well, you're great, but you're very young, and you haven't paid all of your dues, so all we have for you is maternity leaves and weekends and part-time and casual work. I was working in Victoria at the time. I wanted to make the move back to Vancouver. Or I was told, well, you know, you've paid your dues, but you're past 30, so you probably peaked. And all we're really going to take a chance on you around is part-time and casual maternity leaves. And I guess these are ploys that work well with hiring managers who don't really have to make a lot of sacrifices on their end when they put these great offers out there. And I would routinely turn these offers down. And friends and well-wishers thought I was nuts. What are you doing, they said. Why don't you look at this as your big chance, your big break? It's just around the corner, kid. It's going to happen. And I always thought to myself, but why would I take a pay cut? Or why would I give up the health and the extended coverage benefits that I've earned? Or why would I give up the vacation time that I've earned or the seniority that I've earned so that I'm not the first person fired when the station does the next round of cuts? Do I have holes in my head? I did not. But it was an incredibly demoralizing period. Every time someone who was younger or less expensive took a job that ought to have gone to me, a little part of you, a little bit, dies. But I wasn't alone in how I felt, and the data confirmed that. Women say that they are vastly less likely to be satisfied with their opportunities for career advancement than men. Men, about 2/3 of them say that that they are satisfied. Again, for women, it's fewer than half. So what did I learn from my own heartache? I learned that if you don't like the opportunities to advance where you are, you might have to break a new path. And looking back, the lesson was, it's not just about knowing when to say no to the wrong job or the wrong individual project or the wrong client. We have to say no sometimes to things that we feel like we ought to say yes to. But it's also about knowing when to say no to the wrong career. So that takes me to the third lesson that I learned, which is never, ever, ever, ever be afraid to say yes. So around the time that I was saying a lot of no, I received a job offer completely out of left field and outside of my field. I was going to say no to that because it was outside of what I'd done. It was going to mean packing in a career I'd poured about a dozen years into, a little more than that. Only thing I ever wanted to do. And it wasn't just about the years and the effort. From a practical point of view, making a big change in jobs and crossing the street to communications and policy and advocacy work meant that I was probably never going to be able to go back to journalism. So it's not like, well, I'm going to try this for a bit, and if it doesn't work out, I've still got, no. It was a wholesale break. And there were no guarantees this gamble was going to work out. And I almost said no. I was getting really good at saying no. But I had to overcome my fear of saying yes. And that happened when a mentor and a wonderful friend took me for coffee, and she said something so cliched but true. And she said it as only she can. She said, "Shach, you gotta be open to the universe." I mean, like, how many times have you heard that? But for me, it was like one of those should have had a V8 moments. It was like head smacking, like, of course. I thought that was Mark coming to, like, I thought that was literally the hook. In essence, she was challenging me to ask myself, what is the worst thing that's going to happen? And it was like one of those, as I say, it was just one of those moments. And you think about it and you go, well, what is the worst thing that's going to happen? I couldn't really think of anything so terrible. So I said, a great big sloppy yes. Now, it wasn't easy. I don't want to give the impression that it was just like that. It wasn't, because as I walked away, it was very bittersweet. And there was still a part of me that felt like leaving represented failure. And I was apprehensive about starting something brand new. Was it going to work out? What was I going to do if it didn't? So all of those worst things that can happen, yeah, once I left, that was when I started worrying about that. But interestingly, that apprehension is a feeling that I've come to know very well over the years. It's become my good friend. It comes and visits me from time to time. But what I didn't feel, in spite of feeling that apprehension, was any hesitation about taking a risk. Because I reasoned that no matter how bad things got, no matter how bad the new venture was, even if I couldn't go back to my old work, still had this, still had my brain, still had all my fingers and toes, was good for manual labor if I had to do it, had a little bit of savings, and hey, I could always move back in with mom and dad. And let me tell you, not being afraid to say yes has served me very well. Because 18 months after I first answered in the affirmative and left journalism for a job as a policy analyst, I said yes again to a job in technology sales, which was the last thing I had ever trained for, but I learned a lot. And about a year after that, I said yes to taking on the work of public opinion polling, something that I was already a complete expert in. And then a year and a half ago, saying yes one more time to starting a not-for-profit organization from scratch, which takes me back to that day on the carpet with the no frog boxes and just what have I done? How many of you have had that moment? How many of you have made a conscious change around work and had all of those feels? Hands up, I want to see them. A lot of you. Well, you're in a pretty cool club. Because saying yes involves inherent risk. And I noticed hands of all kinds go up in this room. But I have to say that when we did the polling on this, what we found is that inherent risk in taking that on is the one thing that women are disproportionately averse to. And this is interesting because women feel just as confident as men in applying for jobs. They are more likely to say that they are career focused than men are. They're less likely to say that they don't know how to go about making those changes in their lives than men. But what women are not as likely to say is that we're comfortable with risk. And while fewer than half of those knowledge and creative sector men that we talked to said that they're not the type to take a risk with their career, women, it's the majority. Now, the blogosphere is full of posts about how it's not cool to teach girls to be scared, and that the best thing anyone can do for their daughters is to teach them to be brave, or their nieces or their little sisters. And my mother, I am sure to her regret, raised a very fearless, willful child. Bullies did a little bit of work on that. But regardless of our gender or who we are in life or how we see each ourselves in life, we do need to think about putting more value into saying yes to risk. Because in my experience, when you know your worth, when you know when to say no, and when you're never, ever, ever afraid to say yes, that's when interesting, rewarding, dramatic, and enriching things tend to happen. Like being here this morning. But it doesn't mean that I don't still feel like these girls from time to time. Thanks for listening.
When you're doing polling, and you're, unlike a lot of others, maybe all the others, I don't know, you tell us, you don't have a political alignment and agenda, you're a nonprofit, you're looking for the truth. So my question is this: have you ever done a poll where the truth, the reality, was shocking or backfired on you or caused backlash?
Oh, yes,
really?
yes,
Tell us about that.
yes. The most recent example I can tell you about that was a little over a year ago. It was prior to the last federal election, and as many of you will remember, the country was basically on fire, just aflame over some of the anti-terrorism legislation and security legislation that had been tabled. So that was Bill C-51, C-51, later C-24, but primarily C-51. Country freaked out. Protests in the public square and in the agora like we hadn't seen in a long time. It was a big, big deal. So one of the things we do at the Institute is we measure opinion on these public policy matters, and it was like, well, God, it's time to go do that one. We asked Canadians about the specific parts of the legislation. We asked them about their general thoughts on public safety and on the terror threat. Is it overblown? Is it a real thing? What do we think? And the number that came back, and I remember it was February, and I remember looking at the tables because, I don't know, think about the thing that you're waiting for. I won't liken it to Christmas morning because it's like Christmas morning 3 times a week at work, but you're waiting, you look at the tables, holy crap, our data shows that 4 in 5 Canadians actually support this thing. What? That's certainly not what's being reflected. That's certainly not what the headlines say. It's certainly not what the protests show us. And I know that the minute I drop this wicked new beat on the country, it's going to blow back on us like crazy, because people who are very passionate about this issue are going to go nuts and not like the numbers and look for explanations and failures in a result that they may not be very excited about. Or excited about, but not in a positive way. And that's exactly what happened. People were very exercised. Of course, what often happens, and I've had this happen on many parts of the spectrum, you're right, we're absolutely 100% nonpartisan. So what does that mean? It means that we have no dog in any fight. Everybody has their own personal biases or views on an issue, but I leave all of that at the door when we're looking at how we craft our questionnaires and how we put these issues together. And so what immediately happens is government of the day, the then conservative government of the day, leap on this. See, the Angus Reid Institute, they've got this poll and we're right and all of you protesters are wrong, and aren't they awesome for getting these numbers for us? And I was like, no, we didn't do it for you, we didn't do it for you, we didn't do it for you. The same thing has happened on the left of center spectrum, where we have a finding that strongly correlates with what an NDP or the then Liberal leader of the day would be talking about, and all of a sudden they would be widely circulating and quoting those numbers. That goes with the territory, it's collateral damage, but to your point, that was a very specific experience of it happening, and the amount of hate mail I got, woo, nilly.
That's an amazing answer.
I have a question about the questions, because my frustration with filling out any of those questions is usually that I could go either way, or I don't fully agree at all, or like I sometimes feel like it's not accurate in what I want to say, or maybe I'm not understanding the question. So how do you get around that?
Well, you do have to, so that's called the metrics of a question. And that is one of the things that my colleagues and I have great, fantastic colleagues who are so experienced at this. Our survey guru is a woman named Meg Burns, and she works with us out of Winnipeg. And we pull our hair out over getting those metrics right. And it's tough to do, and sometimes you can't get them perfect, but you can get them right. But it's just about ensuring that answer choices are there. So whether it's an approval or a disapproval or an agreement or a disagreement, and we have these conference calls where we're like, well, is that the right word? Is that the right metric? Are we measuring the right thing? And we always put a don't know and a can't say in there for people who do throw up their hands at the end of that question and go, I really don't know.
I should just let only women.
All right, Shachi. So many, many years ago, I was a grad student and doing survey analysis, and that was in the days of phones. And sort of a geeky question: how do you get a sample versus population in an online world today? How has polling changed such that you know that you're actually getting a representative sample when you don't have a phone book to tell you the population anymore? It's kind of a geeky question. You know what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking. Does everyone else know what? Does everyone understand representative sample? Do we kind of have a sense of that? Okay. So in those Farrah Fawcett, Miami Vice, Friends days of phone polling, yes, the phone book was the place where you knew that you had, that was who the population was, that's who lived in the community. And more than that, the idea or the theory was everybody had a landline. And more than that, everyone wanted to pick up their landlines. So everyone, according to sampling theory, then had an equal and representative chance of being solicited for a survey and being offered the chance to answer questions. And that was the assumed and the accepted methodology. A bunch of things happened over time. People cut their cords. People stopped picking up the phones. People who pick up phone polls now, we know this from the data, tend to be older, and they are perhaps retired or whatever's going on in their lives, or maybe their kids don't call them enough, they will talk to pollsters. And so the pitfalls of at-home landline phone polling has really opened up some concerns. And so one of the things we saw, for example, in the 2012 election in the United States was polling was showing Mitt Romney and Barack Obama running neck and neck right up until Election Day. And then, of course, on Election Day in 2012, it wasn't even close. It was a blowout. Well, what happened? What happened was a number of polling firms had simply talked to too many older people in the Midwest who said that they were going to vote Romney. So that's phone polling. The counterpart to that, of course, is online polling. And so I want to be very clear. When I talk about online polling, I'm not talking about like those news sites where it's like, are you mad at TransLink? Yes, no, and then instant results. Online polling, the way we do it and the way online pollsters do it, is they create an online panel. And you will have, our online panel has about 150,000 people in it. So to your question, how do you get that representative sample? You're never going to get a truly 100% representative sample, which is why we don't claim a margin of error with our work. But what you can get is pretty close. And you're able, in that bucket of your 150,000, to ensure that you're always recruiting people in from different economic levels, different age groups, different regional places. So just in the same way that you would know how to find people of those groups in the phone book, you do it by basically screening folks in, and then when you need to go do that poll, you're able to balance your sample to census data and say, okay, well, if census data says that we are 52% women and 48% men in this country, then we're going to make sure that our sample is 52% women, 48% men. And again, break it down along age lines and regional lines, education, income, whatever data we want to screen for, we're able to do that. You know, some people talk about the idea that an online sample is a juiced sample, so that if you want to simply respond to the survey, you're going to sign up to this panel and you're going to get a chance to respond, and therefore, if you feel very strongly about any particular issue, somehow this skews the poll or the results. That's not the case with the polling that we do, and of course, there are varying levels of quality in terms of online polling samples and panels, and you have to actually do quite a bit of work to ensure good quality. But it's important to remember that of that 150,000 people in that large national bucket of Canadians that we have on file to talk to, it doesn't mean that all 150,000 are getting asked questions every time on everything. It's about a 1% sample rate. So basically, we're going out to about 1,500 to 2,000 people for our sample. And so people don't always know what questions they're going to get asked. They don't always know what the topics are going to be about. In fact, they never know. They simply are invited to answer a poll in the same way that you would on the phone, and either they do it or they don't. That was a very long and geeked out answer, but I hope it made sense.
We're running long, so we're gonna do a couple of quick questions with quick answers.
Okay, but that was not an easy question.
Okay, I got another hard question for you.
Okay, great.
Okay, so being able to describe what people think is a very powerful thing, and it's not just describing reality. In fact, it's a tool for manipulating and creating reality. And the relationship between opinion polling and industry or established political power is a sustainable model because it's a good business model. What is the prospect for using your tools for creating a more positive reality? What about polling for the revolution? Possible? Impossible?
Holy shit.
Well, if the revolution wants to commission a poll, have at her. You know, you talk about the reflection of public opinion as a creation or a manipulation of reality, and I would not argue or disagree with you that that can happen. You know, we see that with advocacy polling, with commercial polling. You have folks who go out into the world and will commission a poll that reflects what they want to put out into the world, not necessarily what people think. I can only speak for the work that we do. One of the other things that we're completely obsessed about and tear our hair out about is ensuring context. So it doesn't matter, or it does matter, but it doesn't only matter if you agree or disagree with a particular policy or view on the world or view on life. It's how important is that to you? Where does that live on your priority list? It's fine if 90% of people agree with the legalization of marijuana. Actually, I think it's close to 80%, but where does that actually stand on what they want to see government getting to first on the long list of things that they need to get to? That's where context comes in.
Quick one. How do you get access to your 150,000 database? Where are the email addresses, and how much of a response do you get then?
A really good, solid question. So we are constantly inviting people and recruiting people through online methods and other ways to join the panel, and it is via email. So when we want to recruit sort of 19 to 25-year-old guys, we're on gaming websites. When we're trying to find, 50-something plus women, they're the most engaged. It's really not hard to find them, but maybe we're on a news site or a blogging site, or we're on Pinterest, who knows? So we're looking for our people in different areas according to where we're most likely to find them. We invite them to come in and basically join the panel. Response rates are about 40 to 50%, which is quite high by industry standards. By contrast, phone polling, and I'm not here to throw shade on phone polling, but phone polling is about 10%, so it's quite a bit higher. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, we're gonna wrap this up. This is a Thank you card from us to you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Round of applause for Sach.